Welcome, listeners. I'm Silas, your sleepy storyteller, pulling you down the rabbit hole of time, where dreams and memories intertwine. If you enjoy these videos, please tap the like button. It really helps. Also, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can keep drifting along on your sleepy journey through history. And before we wander down the rabbit hole, share your city and time in the comments. I love imagining our journey threading through every ticking clock. Now, take a moment to find a comfortable resting position. Close your eyes gently, and in your own time, allow yourself to sink into the quiet atmosphere of the past as we begin our slow journey together. The sea is the first thing that greets me, though tonight it feels less like a welcome and more like a warning. Cape Cod Bay lies before me in December of 1620, locked in the grip of frost. The shoreline is a desolation of ice-slick rocks and snowdrifts that crack underfoot with every step. The wind rushes in from the water with such force it feels sharpened, like a blade against the cheek, scattering snowflakes like tiny knives across the skin. Even the air tastes of salt and iron, biting at the tongue. I draw my coat tighter, but the cold seems to laugh at such gestures. It seeps through wool and skin, burrowing into bone. Each breath I release is torn from me in a cloud of vapor, caught and carried away before I can even feel it. The silence is overwhelming, broken only by the groan of distant ice shifting against the rocks and the mournful cry of a gull wheeling somewhere overhead. This is not the welcoming land the Pilgrims imagined. This is a crucible of survival. The harbor stretches wide before me, a frozen mirror rimmed with jagged ice. Where in another world there might be bustling wharves or lantern-lit docks, alive with trade and chatter, here there is only emptiness. The water is too cold to welcome fishers, too wild to be tamed by oars. Frost clings to the shoreline in jagged fingers, as though the land itself has hardened its heart against these weary newcomers. The settlers' footprints dot the snow, thin-soled shoes never made for this climate. Some prints stagger, cutting sideways before vanishing into deeper drifts. Others are small, belonging to children, though fewer each day remain to make them. The harbor, in its stark beauty, feels more like a sentinel than a sanctuary, watching silently, indifferent to whether these fragile souls endure the season or vanish beneath its ice. I pause to take in the horizon, where gray water meets a gray sky. The two blur together until there is no seam, no boundary, only a vast wall of desolation. The very air smells of brine and cold stone, thick with the memory of storms. In summer, perhaps, the bay will glitter, alive with promise. Tonight, it is only a mirror of hardship. And there, looming across the frozen harbor, is the Mayflower. The ship that carried them across the Atlantic now creaks and groans under the weight of winter. Its masts sway gently, rigging stiff with ice that rattles in the wind like chains. The sails hang furled, hardened with frost, until they look more like slabs of stone than cloth. Lanterns glow faintly from within, but their light is weak. mere pinpricks swallowed by the vast dark that presses in from every direction. From this distance, the vessel looks as though it should inspire pride. It is the symbol of survival, the ark that bore them across a vast and hostile sea. But closer, its truth is clear. The Mayflower has become a floating hospital, a coffin that has not yet closed its lid. Inside, men and women lie huddled against the planks, their breath shallow, their bodies racked with coughs that echo through the wooden ribs of the ship. Pneumonia clutches at lungs, scurvy gnaws at gums, and fever paints cheeks with a false fire. Mothers cradle children who do not stir. Fathers lie too weak to rise, their faces shadowed by exhaustion deeper than sleep. The smell drifts even here to the shore, a mingling of salt, smoke, and the sour tang of sickness. It is a smell that clings to the air, a reminder that survival does not mean safety. I close my eyes for a moment, listening. The groan of timbers, the rattle of ropes, the cough of a child muffled by the wind. It is strange to think that gratitude begins here, not in plenty, but in this very desolation. For the Pilgrims, arrival meant survival. They had crossed an ocean that swallowed countless before them. Storms had raged, food had dwindled, and death had already claimed some at sea. And yet, when land rose on the horizon, their hearts must have surged with hope. Here was a new beginning, the promise of freedom, of worship unchained, of fields that might one day bear their crops. But the land that greeted them was no promised Eden. It was frozen and hostile, its ground unyielding, its trees howling with winter winds. Hope did not vanish, but it bent, it cracked, under the weight of cold and hunger. I look back at the Mayflower and think of what it represents now. Not triumph, but endurance. Not destiny, but debt. Every plank of that ship is marked by hands that grasped it in sickness, by prayers whispered against its beams, by bodies lowered into the sea from its deck. It has become less a vessel of promise and more a witness to suffering. The shoreline itself tells the story of this first winter. Half-frozen fish bones lie abandoned near the rocks, remnants of failed meals. Firewood piles are meager, damp logs stacked haphazardly against the wind. A single boot print, deep, dragging, shows where someone collapsed under the weight of snow before being carried inside. Nearby, I see a crude fire pit, its stones blackened, its embers long cold. Around it, scraps of hardtack biscuits lie broken in the snow. I crouch to pick one up. It crumbles at the touch, dry as bone. To eat this is to scrape survival from the edge of despair. The gull cries again above me, circling low, its wings sharp against the pale sky. Even it seems to sense the weakness below, waiting for scraps that death will leave behind. And yet, gratitude does exist here. It flickers like the lanterns within the Mayflower, faint but stubborn. Gratitude that the stormy seas are behind them, that the land, frozen though it is, at least offers soil for spring planting. Gratitude that even in sickness, some still breathe, and that families cling together against the cold. Gratitude here is not a feast. It is a defiance. It is the whispered prayer of a widow who has buried her husband but still tends her child. It is the steady hand of a man chopping wood though his body shakes with fever. It is the child who laughs once, briefly, before coughing overtakes him again. This is the beginning of Thanksgiving, not abundance, but survival. Not feasting, but faith. The snow thickens, swirling around me in wild, dancing patterns. It blinds the horizon, softening the Mayflower into a ghostly silhouette. I draw my cloak tighter, though the cold still gnaws at me, relentless. I turn back toward the shoreline, my boots crunching against the frozen ground. Behind me, the harbor groans under ice. The Mayflower creaks, and the wind wails like a hymn of sorrow. And yet, beneath it all, there is something else. A pulse, faint but steady. A determination that refuses to die, no matter how harsh the winter. Gratitude is born here, not in plenty, but in pain. And as I leave the shoreline, I whisper to the night, gratitude begins when we are still alive to give it. The snow does not relent. By the time my steps carry me inland from the frozen harbor, the drifts rise nearly to my knees. Each stride is a labor, each boot sinking into powder that clings and resists as though the earth itself would rather I remain buried here. The wind drives the flakes sideways, stinging my legs, finding every gap in my cloak, every seam in my gloves. My breath becomes a rhythm of clouds, one puff, then another, fading into the blizzard's endless veil. It is hard to imagine that anyone survives in such a place. And yet, in the distance, I see smoke curling faintly against the gray sky, thin, weary tendrils rising from a crude chimney, carried sideways by the gale before dispersing into nothingness. The sight of it feels both pitiful and profound. Where there is smoke, there are fires. Where there are fires, there are people clinging to life. I crest a small rise, and there it is, the common house. It stands squat and incomplete, a skeleton of timber walls lashed together with desperate haste. Snow crusts its roof, where the thatch has not yet been finished, and the wind whistles freely through gaps between the planks. The chimney leans like a wounded soldier, patched with clay and stone that smoke seeps through in thin, gray ribbons. Each exhale of the house seems labored, as though the building itself struggles to breathe. The ground around it is trampled, the snow churned by many feet. Half-buried sawdust litters the drifts, frozen stiff. An axe leans forgotten against a stump, its blade rimed with ice. Even tools, it seems, are too weary to be lifted again. I step closer and place my hand against the wood. The timbers are rough, hastily cut, and already warped by the wet cold. They smell of sap and smoke, of trees torn down and pressed into service against time itself. My fingers come away damp, and I imagine how quickly frost will chew through the walls when the fire inside falters. A door swings open on crude hinges. For a moment, a spill of warmth breathes out, carrying with it the mingled scent of smoke, sweat, and sickness. A voice coughs from within, harsh and ragged, followed by another answering in weary sympathy. Then the door closes again, shutting me out, and the winter swallows the warmth whole. I can see it in my mind, though, the inside of that common room. Men and women huddled close to the fire, their faces hollow with hunger, eyes glinting with fever. Children wrapped in blankets too thin to keep the cold away, their small hands clutching stale crusts of hardtack. The air thick with the constant hacking of lungs raw from pneumonia, with the whispered prayers of those who know their neighbors will not live to see another dawn. And yet, for all its frailty, this house is a triumph. It stands where before there was nothing. It shelters when the wind would claim every soul outside. It is both sanctuary and tomb, a place where life clings stubbornly, though death circles ever closer. Beyond the common house, I see them, the settlers' first individual shelters. They are more suggestion than house, more prayer than protection. Small huts crouched against the wind, their roofs sagging under snow that seeps through every gap. The walls lean at odd angles, planks nailed hastily, as though the builder's hands shook from exhaustion. Many of the roofs are unfinished, open to the sky, patched with straw or hides that flap in the gale. I pass one hut where a woman sits just inside the doorway, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She stares at the snow falling before her as though willing it to stop, though she knows it will not. Behind her, in the dim light of the fire, I glimpse two children pressed close together, their eyes wide, their cheeks gaunt. The woman lifts her hand briefly in greeting, or perhaps in surrender, and then lowers it again to her lap. Another home bears fresh tracks in the snow where men have trudged back and forth with wood. The logs are meager, damp, and smoke curls from gaps in the roof as much as from the chimney. Inside, a shadow bends over the fire, coaxing sparks with desperate patience. The smell of burning green wood carries to me, sharp, acrid, the scent of necessity. I pause before one particularly small hut, its roof barely taller than myself. The door hangs crooked, propped by a single hinge. Through the gap, I hear voices. A man murmuring a psalm, his voice steady though thin. Each line is answered by his wife, her words faltering with coughs. Their voices together form a fragile harmony, the sound of faith refusing to yield even as the cold presses in from all sides. The sight of these homes weighs heavily. Each one is both victory and defeat, proof that the settlers will not lie down and die, and yet evidence of how near to death they walk each night. The walls hold them, but barely. The fires warm them, but not enough. Each morning, someone fails to rise, and another grave is dug in frozen earth. Snow piles high on the roofs, threatening to crush them under its weight. Frost creeps along the planks like an enemy soldier advancing without sound. The cold does not rest, does not tire, does not show mercy. And yet these people endure, clinging to their huts with the stubbornness of roots breaking stone. I glance back at the common house, its smoke still curling upward, and then forward to the crooked huts with their fragile fires. This is the village of Plymouth in its infancy, a handful of shelters huddled against the wind, half buried in snow, half swallowed by despair. It is no city, no fortress, It is a scattering of hopes pressed hard against the edge of survival. And yet, even here, there is gratitude. It is not the gratitude of feasting or of plenty. It is the gratitude of waking in the morning to find breath still in the chest. The gratitude of a hut that leans but does not collapse, of a fire that smokes but does not die, of bread that is stale but still sustains. In later years, when the harvest is full and the fields golden, they will look back on this winter and know that every bite of corn, every loaf of bread, every shared meal is born of this season of hunger. Thanksgiving, though not yet named, begins here in the snowdrifts, in the huts where children sleep hungry but alive, in the common house where coughs echo but fires still burn. It is gratitude not for what they have, but for what they endure. The wind rises again, sweeping snow across the huts in swirling sheets. It hisses through the gaps in their walls, rattles their shutters, drives smoke back down chimneys. I pull my cloak tighter and press forward, leaving behind the flickering glow of the common house, the crooked roofs of the settlers' first homes. Behind me, the fires crackle faintly, a heartbeat in the frozen night. Ahead, more snow, more struggle, but also, perhaps, the faint glimmer of survival. And as I walk deeper into Plymouth, I whisper, every wall that stands tonight is a miracle. Every fire that burns is a hymn, and every soul that endures is a thanksgiving in itself. The wind screams tonight. It comes howling down from the north like a beast, without face or mercy, clawing across the frozen fields of Plymouth and lifting the snow into spirals that dance like ghosts around me. The drifts are no longer gentle mounds of white. They are shifting dunes that move with every gust, erasing tracks, erasing labor, erasing hope. Each step forward is a negotiation with the earth. One boot sinking, one boot sliding. My balance tested again and again. I shield my face with my cloak, though the cloth is stiff with frost. The air bites at my skin until it stings, until my cheeks feel carved from stone. I exhale, and the breath billows out before me, only to be ripped apart by the gale. The world is white and gray and endless, and for a moment I understand how death here is not a single event, but a presence. Something that presses against every rib, every breath, every step. At last, the fields stretch before me, bare and wide, their outlines only faintly visible beneath the snow. I know these fields will one day bear corn, beans, pumpkins, and wheat. I know children will laugh among furrows, and men will walk here with scythes slung across their shoulders. But tonight, in this first winter, the land is nothing but frozen clay, hard as iron beneath the snow. I stamp my boot, and the sound is dull, lifeless, as though even the soil refuses to yield. Here lies the settler's greatest enemy, not just the cold wind, not just the hunger gnawing at their stomachs, but time itself. The season is wrong. They arrived too late to plant, too late to harvest, too late to coax life from earth before the frost claimed it. Every mound of snow is a reminder that their survival rests not on what they can grow, but on what little they carried across the sea. The fields are barren, but not silent. The wind moans across them, a hymn of emptiness, carrying the faint groan of timbers from the village huts behind me. I imagine the pilgrims looking out upon this same sight each morning, their faces pale, their eyes sunken, knowing that food will not come from this soil until spring, if they last that long. I kneel briefly and scoop a handful of snow. It burns against my palm, melting slowly into icy water. I let it run through my fingers and whisper, "Someday you will nourish. Someday you will yield. But not tonight. Tonight you are famine-wearing white." I push forward, the snow dragging at my legs until I see it. A crude storage hut, its roof sagging beneath a heavy cap of ice. Smoke does not rise from it. No hearth warms its interior. The walls creak against the gale, their seams patched with mud and straw already stiff with frost. The door hangs crooked, swollen by damp, but I shoulder it open. Inside, the air is still and sour. The smell hits me first, a pungent mixture of rot, salt, and mildew. The dim light from the doorway reveals barrels stacked in corners, their iron bands rusting, their lids askew. Salted meat lies within, but much of it is spoiled, its flesh gray, its brine clouded. Rats have chewed through sacks of grain, leaving trails of droppings along the floorboards. On one shelf, a line of hardtack biscuits sits in neat stacks, though they are anything but inviting. Their surfaces are pocked, their edges sharp. I tap one with my finger, and it resounds like stone. It is food in the barest sense, something to keep jaws moving, to trick the body into believing it is sustained. Barrels of beer line another wall, their staves slick with condensation. The liquid inside has soured in places, though it is still drunk, because water here, drawn from brackish pools or icy streams, carries sickness more certain than the weak ale. Beer becomes lifeblood, even when it tastes of bitterness. The air in the hut carries the weight of rationing, of eyes measuring each crumb and drop. I imagine the settlers gathered here by lantern light, their breath fogging in the cold, counting supplies with trembling hands. One man marks notches in a ledger, his lips pressed tight. A woman leans over, whispering questions. How much remains? How long it will last? Children peer through the doorway, their eyes wide, their stomachs growling audibly. And always, at the end of the tally, silence falls. Not enough. Never enough. As I stand in that dim storage hut, I begin to notice details carved into the space like wounds. A scrap of cloth tied around a barrel stave, perhaps to keep the lid shut tighter. A gnawed bone tossed into a corner, chewed clean though it once belonged to a pig eaten weeks ago. A spoon abandoned on a shelf, its handle cracked, its bowl stained with grease long since licked clean. Hunger leaves its fingerprints everywhere. I close my eyes and hear it. The cough of a man too weak to rise. The cry of a child denied even a scrap. The whispered prayer of a mother pressing a crust into her child's hand while she herself eats nothing. Hunger turns every act into sacrifice, every mouthful into a decision of who will live and who may not. Outside, the wind moans again, and I step from the hut into the whirling snow. The fields stretch silent before me, and the village crouches behind, smoke trailing faintly from its huts. Between them lies the storage hut, a symbol of both survival and despair. a reminder that life persists, but only barely. And yet, somehow, gratitude still survives here. It is not the gratitude of abundance, the heaping table, the golden harvest, the laughter of plenty. It is the gratitude of crumbs, the gratitude of a crust of hardtack softened in weak beer, of a strip of salted meat boiled into broth until it yields the ghost of flavor. It is the gratitude of a fire that warms a room, though it fills the lungs with smoke. Gratitude sharpens when food is scarce. Each mouthful becomes a prayer, each sip a hymn. To eat at all is to defy the wind, to mock the frost, to stand against death for another night. Someday, they will feast. Someday, they will invite their Wampanoag neighbors to share a harvest, the tables heavy with corn and squash and venison. But that day will only exist because of nights like these, when gratitude was born not in plenty, but in hunger, not in triumph, but in endurance. I step away from the storage hut, the door creaking shut behind me. Snow immediately covers my tracks, erasing any proof that I ever stood there. The fields remain barren, the wind relentless. My cloak snaps in the gale like a banner of surrender, though I press it tighter around me and move forward. Behind me, the common house smokes faintly. Ahead, Coles Hill waits, its ground hiding the truth of how many did not survive the hunger. But for now, I carry with me the lesson of this place. In a land of frost and famine, gratitude is measured not by feasts, but by the breath that still fogs in the frozen air. The snow has learned how to silence. When I step into the drifted path, my boots crunch once, sharply. Then the sound is swallowed whole. The world becomes muffled, wrapped in white, as though every sound is pressed beneath a blanket. Even the wind, fierce as it cuts through the harbor, seems dulled here, its roar softened to a hiss. It feels like walking in a muffled grave, where each step threatens to disturb the silence of the dead. The flakes fall steadily, not in swirling fury, but in slow, relentless descent. They coat every timber, every thatch, every crooked roof. They bury footprints in minutes, erasing the proof of life as though the land itself wishes to forget. I pass along the narrow track that winds between huts, and the signs of sickness are everywhere. A woman leans against her doorway, her face hollow, her lips tinged blue. She clutches a shawl around her shoulders, but the cloth is too thin, the wool threadbare. Each cough racks her frame as though her very bones wish to escape. She does not notice me as I pass. Her eyes stare into the snow, glazed, as though searching for something that is not there. A man lurches across the clearing, his steps uneven. He leans heavily on a stick, each movement a battle with both the drifted snow and his own failing body. His skin is waxen, pale beneath the beard that has grown wild in neglect. His breath comes ragged, whistling, each exhale puffing a desperate cloud into the frozen air. Children's voices are few. I hear one, sharp and sudden, a cough so violent it echoes against the hut walls, breaking the snow's hush. The sound lingers, ragged and raw, before it fades into silence again. Somewhere, a mother's low murmur follows, not of comfort, but of exhaustion, as though words themselves can no longer carry hope. I see no fires crackling cheerfully, no laughter rising. Instead, smoke seeps from chimneys in thin, reluctant strands, carrying not warmth, but the smell of damp wood, of desperation. The air stings my nose, the scent of sickness riding it more strongly than spice or stew. The path climbs upward, and I know where it leads. Ahead, a hill rises, its crown rounded and softened by snow, overlooking the harbor where the Mayflower still rocks in the gray tide. Cole's Hill. From this place, the dead looked down upon the living. The settlers knew they could not dig deep graves, not when the ground was frozen like stone. They scraped only shallow furrows, working with numb fingers, shovels bouncing against the earth. At night, they moved quietly, muffled in darkness, so the Wampanoag watching from the forests would not see how their numbers dwindled. To hide the truth, they buried their dead in secret, covering the shallow graves with snow and corn husks. They feared that if their weakness were known, they would be overrun before spring. And so, the hill became a ledger of loss, its entries written in silence and hidden beneath frost. I climb slowly, the snow dragging at my boots. When I reach the crest, the harbor spreads before me, the Mayflower looming in the distance, its masts blurred by snow. But it is the hill itself that draws me, the ground uneven in places, though the snow smooths it. I can feel what lies beneath. There are no markers here, no headstones to name the fallen, only faint rises, softened mounds. Each one holds a life cut short, a father who crossed an ocean only to collapse from fever, a mother who nursed her children until she herself perished, a child whose lungs gave out against the cold. They lie together now, equal in silence, their names carried only in the memories of the living who are themselves slipping into the same earth. I kneel, brushing snow away with my hand until it stings red. Beneath, I find a piece of wood driven into the ground, its surface rough, uncarved. A marker without inscription. A memory held by no one but the earth. I whisper to the frozen soil, my voice small against the vastness of the bay. I see you. I will not forget. It is here, on this hill of silence, that gratitude feels strangest. For what is there to give thanks for when the air itself is filled with coughing? When graves multiply in secret? When the Mayflower itself reeks of death? Yet the settlers do give thanks, not for abundance, but for survival. For one more breath, one more day, one more ember that glows in the hearth. Gratitude here is not feasting, but breathing. Not celebration, but endurance. It is the knowledge that though dozens lie beneath this hill, dozens more still walk, still hope, still press forward into the snow. I look across the harbor, the ship dark against the slate-gray sea, and I think, it is not plenty that breeds thanksgiving, but scarcity. Not triumph, but survival. The snow falls harder now, stinging my face. The hill feels heavy beneath me, as though the earth itself mourns the weight it carries. I rise, my knees stiff, and stand at the crest, the wind pressing against me. From here, I can see the whole settlement, the crooked huts, the thin smoke, the barren fields. It is a picture of struggle, of despair, painted in white and gray. And yet, it is also a picture of defiance. For every grave dug, someone still rises at dawn. For every cough, someone still builds a fire. For every loss, someone still whispers a prayer. The hill whispers too, though its language is silence. It tells me that gratitude is not the absence of sorrow, but the endurance of it. That to live through a winter like this is itself a kind of thanksgiving, carved not into feasts, but into footsteps pressed against snow. I linger a moment longer, then descend, my boots crunching once more. The sound is quickly swallowed, as though the hill itself pulls me back into silence. Behind me lie the hidden graves, beneath me the muffled earth. Ahead, the village still flickers with fragile light. The forest groans under winter's grip. Every tree creaks like an old ship straining at sea, its limbs snapping beneath frost. The snow lies thick here, not smoothed into fields or beaten down by the settler's boots, but layered wild and untouched, broken only by the marks of animals and the faint suggestion of human passage. The silence of the harbor and the huts is replaced by a deeper, more primal quiet, the kind that presses in on the ears until even the sound of one's breath feels like trespass. And yet, in this silence, I feel it. Eyes watching. At first, I mistake them for deer tracks. A thin line in the snow, indentations careful, deliberate. But deer do not move with such measured purpose, and the prints are too broad, too heavy with the weight of a human step. The tracks weave between the trees, vanishing into shadows, reappearing where the underbrush has been pressed down. I follow them with my gaze, not my boots. For though the snow muffles sound, I know the forest listens, and I know, too, that I am not the only one walking here tonight. Farther off, a thread of smoke rises, faint against the gray sky. It curls upward from somewhere deeper in the woods, a thin signal that life persists where the pilgrims dare not tread. The settlers speak of the Wampanoag people in hushed tones, sometimes fearful, sometimes hopeful, always uncertain. The forest belongs to them, their trails older than any map, their knowledge of the land as intimate as breath. Here, in this moment, I sense them. Not seen, not spoken, but present. Watching the strangers who have built crooked huts along their shore, watching their numbers dwindle, watching their graves multiply on Cole's Hill. The snow shifts beneath a branch, and for the briefest moment, I think I see a figure, lean, cloaked in furs, standing still among the pines. The eyes catch me first, dark and unblinking, before the snow gusts again and the figure melts into shadow. Were they ever there, or only my imagination breathing life into branches? I cannot be sure, but the feeling lingers. I am not alone. The Wampanoag watch because they must. A new people have arrived, desperate and floundering, armed with iron and faith, yet too weak to feed themselves. In another season, they might already be gone, claimed by the sea, the frost, or the hunger that gnaws even now at their bellies. Yet survival is a language spoken by both peoples. The pilgrims endure not through strength, but through stubbornness. The Wampanoag endure through knowledge, through the rhythms of land and sea passed down across generations. Somewhere between suspicion and compassion lies the chance of alliance. The Pilgrims do not yet know it, but the unseen hands in these woods, hands that plant, fish, and guide, will one day teach them how to coax life from this frozen earth. And that gift will one day turn a winter of graves into a harvest of gratitude. For now, though, the distance remains. Smoke behind trees, tracks fading into snow. Watchful eyes unseen, I leave the tree line and return toward the settlement. Along the path, I see them, settlers dragging their bodies against the weight of winter, bent low by necessity. One man staggers forward, a crude snare dangling from his hands. His beard is stiff with frost, his breath whistling through chapped lips. He glances into the underbrush, desperate for the sight of rabbit tracks, for any sign of meat. His shoulders sag as though the snow itself weighs on him, but he presses forward, driven not by hope, but by the raw animal need to feed. Another man trudges with driftwood piled across his back. The wood is wet, heavy, and will burn poorly, but it is better than nothing. His steps sink deep into the snow, and I can see the tremor in his knees, the shaking effort it takes to climb a shallow rise. His face is gaunt, cheeks hollow, eyes sunken, yet he walks. And walking in this winter is triumph enough. By the harbor, a woman kneels in the snow, breaking ice to scoop water into a cracked pail. Her hands are red, raw, but she does not pause. Behind her, in the shadow of a hut, a child watches silently, too weak even to cough. The mother glances back once, her eyes glassy but resolute, then returns to her task. The village is a portrait of stubborn will. Men, women, children, all gaunt, all weary, all bound by the same unyielding choice, to keep moving, even as winter presses against them. I pause near one hut where the door has been left ajar. Inside, I glimpse a family huddled together, wrapped in furs and blankets. The fire is no more than a glow, and their breath clouds the air, as though even the heat cannot claim the room. A boy clutches a crust of bread, gnawing it slowly, as if prolonging the taste might fool his stomach. His father watches, expression blank, perhaps imagining the same crust lasting for days. The smell of sickness lingers even here, a faint sweetness mixed with rot. It clings to every plank, every corner. I know what it means: fever, pneumonia, the slow suffocation that claims so many in these winters. And yet, in the midst of it, I see something else. The mother hums softly, a tune that drifts above the coughing, above the crackle of the fire. A hymn, faint but steady, carrying gratitude in its notes. Not for abundance, but for togetherness. Not for plenty, but for presence. It is here I understand most clearly. Gratitude does not wait for spring. It is forged in winter, in the act of surviving one more night. I turn back toward the tree line, where the smoke of the unseen Wampanoag fire still drifts faintly. The pilgrims struggle in plain sight, their gaunt bodies pressed against the snow, their strength bleeding into the earth. The Wampanoag watch in silence, measuring, weighing, waiting. It is not pity that stays their hands, nor indifference. It is calculation. Who are these strangers? Are they a threat, or merely another echo of the sea, washed up, soon to be washed away? And yet, perhaps, survival whispers differently. Perhaps it says that even the weakest may one day prove useful, if taught, if guided. In this balance lies the seed of alliance. The pilgrims do not yet know Squanto, the Patuxet who will teach them to plant corn, to fish these waters, to survive in a land that rejects ignorance. They do not yet know Massasoit, the Wampanoag leader who will one day share a fragile peace, a fragile feast. For now, they know only the hunger, the cold, and the silence of watchful eyes. The snow falls harder now, coating the tracks, covering the fire's smoke, burying the footsteps of both settler and native. The world is leveled, smoothed, as though winter itself insists that survival belongs only to the stubborn. I stand between the huts and the forest, between the gaunt faces of the pilgrims and the unseen eyes of the Wampanoag, between hunger and knowledge, between despair and endurance. And I whisper into the cold, gratitude here is not for what fills the stomach, but for what still stirs the heart, for the unseen fire, for the hand that still moves, even when frozen, for the alliance not yet born, but already watching. Then I step forward again, leaving behind the paths that vanish into snow, carrying with me the quiet knowledge that survival itself is a prayer, and that the prayer is being heard, though not yet answered. Snow blinds me as I climb. The storm has strengthened, the flakes now sharp as needles, cutting sideways across my vision. Each gust slams against my chest like a wave, forcing me to lean forward, head bowed, boots breaking crusted drifts that cling to my legs like iron. My breath is ragged, each exhale torn from my lungs and turned instantly to frost that lingers before my face like a ghost. The climb is slow, a battle of inches, but I press upward. The hill ahead looms dark against the white blur of the sky. Somewhere on its slopes, the first meeting house rises, a beacon of stubborn resolve against this endless winter. Somewhere beyond, the burial hill waits, where the dead lie hidden beneath snow, their silence shaping the very soil of Plymouth. The cold is numbing, the weight relentless, yet each step feels necessary. For if gratitude has meaning in this place, it will be found not in the hearth or the hut, but here, where voices rise against the storm, and where graves whisper the cost of survival. The meeting house stands plain and small, its timbers black against the snow, smoke leaking thinly from a crude chimney. Its door groans as I push it open, and at once the storm falls away, replaced by warmth, not of heat, but of voices. Inside, settlers gather in the dim glow of tallow candles. Their faces are gaunt, cheeks sunken, eyes hollow from hunger and fever. Yet they stand shoulder to shoulder, mouths open, singing. The hymn is faint, almost fragile, but it climbs nonetheless, weaving with the sound of the storm outside until it feels as if both heaven and earth listen. The boards beneath my feet are uneven, the air thick with the mingled smell of smoke, damp wool, and sickness. Children lean against their mothers, too weak to stand. Men clutch worn Bibles, their fingers trembling, knuckles raw from the cold. Each note of their song carries not triumph, but defiance, an insistence that they are still here, still breathing, still bound together by faith. One man, his voice breaking, reads aloud from the book of Psalms. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. His words are ragged, but the silence that follows is deeper than any cathedrals. In this moment, gratitude is not for feasting, nor for plenty, but for endurance, for the fire that flickers weakly in the hearth, for the hymn that still rises, however thin. I linger at the back, feeling the weight of their faith pressing against the cold. The meeting house is more than shelter. It is covenant between man and God, between neighbor and neighbor, between the living and the dead. When I step back into the storm, the hymn follows me, echoing faintly as I ascend the slope toward Burial Hill. The climb is harder here, the snow deeper, the wind sharper, the sky pressing low like a lid upon the earth. My boots sink past the ankle, then the calf, each step a wrenching pull to free myself from the snow's grip. The town falls away behind me, its crude huts blurred in the storm, its fires faint glimmers in a sea of white. Ahead, the hill rises stark, crowned not with monuments or grandeur, but with silence. It is here that the pilgrims bury their dead, covering the graves quickly, often at night, lest the Wampanoag, watching from the trees, see how their numbers dwindle. Snow conceals the mounds now, but I can feel them beneath my feet. Dozens already claimed by the cold, the hunger, the sickness. Each step up the hill feels like a trespass across sacred ground. At the crest, the storm eases for a moment, and I see the harbor stretched before me. The Mayflower rocks faintly on gray waves, its masts creaking like bones. Beyond it lies only sea and sky, endless, merciless. Behind me, the fields lie barren, the huts small and fragile against the vast white. And all around me, under snow, the dead lie waiting. Here is the truth of Plymouth's covenant. Survival is not free. It is bought, again and again, with bodies laid beneath this hill. Each grave is a seed, not of crops, but of endurance. Each name lost is a prayer for the names that remain. I kneel, my hand pressing into the frozen earth. Beneath my palm is not just soil, but memory. The cough of fever, the groan of hunger, the final whispered prayers of those who came seeking freedom and found death instead. The hill hums with it, a silence more profound than any sound. And yet, from this vantage, I see it too, the future. Fields tilled and green, huts turned to homes, a harvest shared with those who once watched from the woods. A feast not born of plenty, but of gratitude that the earth still gave, that breath still filled the chest, that survival itself was a gift worth celebrating. I whisper into the storm, Words carried across the hill. The first Thanksgiving was not born from abundance. It was born here in scarcity, in hunger, in graves hidden beneath snow. Gratitude itself was defiance, a vow that survival would not be meaningless. The Pilgrims sang in the meeting house, not because they were full, but because they were empty and refused to let emptiness win. They buried their dead in silence, not to hide their weakness, but to preserve the strength of the living. They endured the storm, not because they were unafraid, but because fear could not be allowed the final word. Thanksgiving, in its first breath, was not feast, but covenant, not plenty, but promise, not triumph, but survival. As I descend the hill, the storm thickens once more, veiling the harbor, the huts, the forest. The graves vanish beneath white drifts. The meeting house flickers dimly through the gale, and the Mayflower groans in the distance. Yet the image lingers in my mind, a long table set in the open air, the smell of roasted game, the sound of voices, Pilgrim and Wampanoag, mingled in fragile peace. That day will come, but only because of this. Because of the hunger, the graves, the hymns sung against the storm. Because gratitude dared to exist where none should have. I walk into the snow, my steps swallowed by the wind, whispering one last truth. Survival is the first Thanksgiving. And gratitude, even in frost and shadow, is the covenant that binds the living to hope. Rest easy, friends. The rabbit hole of time holds many more slow steps. Until we meet again, Silas is signing off.